You will see how quickly these will disappear and why these were always my favorite recipe. All you really need to make good bread is a little extra time and a little extra patience. Today I'm going to show you a recipe out of my cookbook. I get so reliant on my blog for recipes that I often forget about this amazing book, and it's gotten so many great reviews that I'm really glad that I went back on this recipe today, because when I set out this morning to make bread, I was going to go for the traditional artisan style bread that 100 million people have already made. And I thought to myself, well, why am I going to make something that a zillion other people already made? Why don't I show them a recipe that brings me all the way back to my Culinary Institute of America days? I loved this recipe so much. I can't tell you how many rye cheese butter crust rolls I ate in my 2-year stay at the CIA. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of a Parker House style roll. It is a special little fold of this bread dough that makes it a Parker House style. It was actually developed at the Omni Parker House Hotel in Boston. Yes, the same place that the famous Boston cream pie was born. So this hotel was putting things on the map way back in the late 1800s, let me tell you. And just like the Boston cream pie, these rolls never go out of style. So what am I doing here? I had some warm water that I added some soy milk to. I'm going to prove my yeast with a couple of pinches of sugar to give them something to eat to activate that yeast. Now, I said these are rye cheese butter crust rolls, but let me tell you, I could not find rye flour in the store to save my life. So I'm actually going to be using whole wheat flour instead, which works equally well. It's just that the flavor is not as good. So, well, I shouldn't say good, it's just not rye, and it's meant to be rye. I want to just show you guys, when you measure flour with a scale versus just relying on what comes out of the cup, the difference is actually startling. So I usually go with a standard cup of flour at 125 grams, and I just scooped straight out of this flour bag and weighed it, and it was 140. So that's a really perfect example of when people say my recipe didn't come out the right way, especially in cake. They want to know why their cake is heavy and dense and gummy and it didn't rise and it didn't bake properly. 9 times out of 10, it's because you had a real heavy hand in measuring the flour with a cup's measure. See, I'm getting 138 grams per cup of flour, and that's just way too much. I use a standard measure of 125 grams per cup, and King Arthur actually even goes less at 113. So you can see right away that 113 compared to 140 when you just dip in and measure straight away, it's a really big difference and can throw off your recipes like really bad. So let's see, I'm going to do it again. You saw that I was fluffing and scooping, and I'm still getting 140 grams. So I'm going to take out a bunch of that because I really want to go with the proper measure that was listed in my book. I mean, look how much I took out just to make it equal 125 grams. Like, that's crazy. So if you ever wonder why your recipes aren't coming out the right way, chances are your flour measure is really off. With bread, though, it's a lot more forgiving than it would be with a cake recipe, but still, that's a really big discrepancy. The flour measure for the bread flour is 2.5 cups, which is about 312 grams total. And we're also going to be putting in a measure of rye flour, but like I said, I couldn't find rye flour in the store anywhere. So I'm using whole wheat flour, which is a pretty interchangeable flour. So those two go together. I've already put a hefty scoop of sugar into my yeast, which, by the way, is getting really nice and frothy. So I'm going to go ahead and put another maybe tablespoon and a half into this mixture. Also, a nice hefty teaspoon of salt. Check out the frothiness on this yeast mixture. I mean, this is really doing its thing. So you also have to get up pretty early in the morning to have bread ready by midday. As I said, you do need some extra time and some patience to make good bread, but really that's about it. Now I am using the KitchenAid mixer for this recipe. You can of course mix any bread recipe by hand if you prefer. But this dough needs to develop for about 8 minutes on medium speed, and I'm going to chop the onion and prepare the other ingredients while this is mixing. I can see that it's going to start clearing the sides and the bottom of the bowl, and I can now let this go on medium to low speed for 8 minutes to develop that gluten. So while that dough is developing for 8 minutes, that gives us a good chance to get our add-ins prepared. And to this rye cheese butter crust Parker House roll, we are going to put some finely chopped onion. It also gets some caraway seeds. Like I said, if you did have the rye flour, those two together are like a marriage made in heaven. Believe me, the whole wheat flour works fine, but again, if you can get the rye flour, it's really what it's meant to be. I also have some shredded vegan cheese here. Cheddar is typically what we use, but really you could use anything that you want. So the thing about making bread is pretty much the only time we don't live by exacts in baking. Every other time it's an exact time, it's an exact temperature, it's an exact measure. But when making bread, it's more of getting a feel for the dough, understanding the temperature in the kitchen that you're working in, understanding the temperature of the ingredients that you're putting into the bread. The humidity in the air is going to play a part. So when you're making bread, you really do have to understand those subtle nuances, because all of those things can play into the final result of your bread. This is a very good beginner recipe, because if you really do just follow along to the times that I have listed, weigh out your ingredients properly, you're not going to fail at this. Believe me, this is a really easy recipe that I know you're just going to love. Now this is definitely way more onion than I need for this recipe. I only need about a half a cup, so I'll use the rest of it for something else. To that I'm going to add the caraway seed, and that's going to be 1 to 2 tablespoons depending on how much you like caraway. You can absolutely leave the seeds out if you don't like that flavor. I do love it. And then 1/4 to a half a cup of the shredded cheese. All right, check this out. This is after 8 minutes of mixing. The dough is a little bit sticky, but it's not really sticking to my fingers when I pull it. It's kind of nice. Look at that nice gluten development. Beautiful. So next what we're going to do is add in that caraway, the cheddar shreds, and the onion. I'm also adding in about a teaspoon of onion powder to mine. So now we're just going to let that mix together for another minute just to incorporate all of those ingredients. So if any of you have made Parker House rolls before, you know that in addition to the way that the dough is folded over onto itself for each individual roll, it is folded with butter in between those two layers. So right away, you're probably going to say, oh Lord, here she goes again, doing something really weird. Like, that's not how you make a Parker House style roll. Like, why am I cutting these little individual pats of butter? Well, this is the way that I learned how to do it way back in my Culinary Institute of America days, 25 plus years ago. And this is the way they taught us how to make the Parker House style roll. We literally, hey, where'd that other piece go? Here it is. We had to cut individual pats of butter that are going to get folded up in between each roll. So I can't, looking, like, obviously when I learned how to do it, I never knew a different way. And of course, this is the way that you do it. So I can't really explain why they would have taught us to do it that way. I mean, I'm trying to think, maybe was it more efficient to do it that way rather than brush melted butter on each roll? But absolutely no, that is not quicker. I mean, look at how much time it's taking me just to cut these little pats of butter, right? I'm going to do it both ways. I really want to show you the way that they taught us and the way that it's more often done. I think if you look up any recipe for a Parker House style roll, you're going to see that the butter gets brushed on there and not done at all this way. So I'm going to go ahead and put my little pats of butter into the freezer so that they're ready to stuff inside of each little roll as soon as our dough is ready. So it's getting to close to 30 minutes. We're going to go ahead and fold this on top of itself 20 times, and then it has to rest for 45 minutes to an hour. So we're just going to take this dough and gently pull it up and fold it on top of itself. I don't want to add any extra flour to this. That's going to throw off the ratio of the dough. So it's sticky, but it's not really sticking to my fingers at all. So you're just going to want to pull up from the bottom. Look at that beautiful gluten. It's not breaking. It's nice and stretchy. And I'm turning the bowl as I'm pulling up from the bottom and just folding it down on top of itself. You could dip your fingers in a little bit of water if you're finding that the dough is really sticking to your hands and it's annoying you. But I mean, that little bit of dough is not a really big deal. You can kind of just stick that back in. But you're going to do this about maybe 15 to 20 times as you're rotating the bowl, pulling up on it, really stretching that gluten. I love working with dough so much. If you haven't tried it, if you're intimidated by bread making, I really do encourage you to try it. I mean, like I said, there are some tips to success in making perfect bread, but this is a really good beginner's recipe that I know you're also going to love because it's just so delicious. I will warn you, these are some pretty dangerous rolls. They're so easy to eat. I don't know, I probably have eaten like a million of them in my lifetime. That's how good these are. All right, so I'm going to now flip that over. We're going to let this dough do its thing for about 45 minutes. Now you're going to cover it, keep it in a warm spot. You're going to let it double in size, and then we're going to roll these into individual Parker House style rolls. Look at this beautiful dough. Oh, you guys need to be feeling this. It is beautiful. So I'm just going to gently press out the excess gases and sort of form it into a shape that I can then cut it into some more even little rolls. Now you're going to get 24 rolls out of this amount of dough because they are meant to be small. When I had my bakery, we had a dough divider that you would just place this whole amount of dough right into the machine, press down on the top, and it would cut it into perfect 24 or 36 or 48, like whatever attachment you put inside the dough divider, it would cut your dough in an instant. So when we're at home, we have to do things a little bit by hand. Then we'll get 12 and 12. So if I cut it in half again, 6, 6, 6, and 6, 24 total. So that's just really the best way to try to keep your cuts as even as possible. So if this was going to be 6, now each one will be 3 and 3, right? Believe me, I know this looks like a tiny little piece of dough. You're like, how could that possibly turn into a dinner roll? Typically, dinner rolls are about 1.5 ounces per serving anyway, so we're going to be pretty much on target. Obviously, my dough shapes aren't exactly perfect, so I'm just trying to get the most even cuts as possible. You could definitely use a scale here if you're not quite sure. Now, you could use a little rolling pin if you needed to, but most of the time, I just sort of pat them out by hand to take the shape of a little rectangle. Now for this really weird butter pat that goes inside, and then you just fold the dough over onto itself. And that's how you form a Parker House roll. Now, I've also seen people take the whole slab of dough, rather than cut them into individual rolls like this, they've rolled out like a rectangle dough, painted the whole thing with melted butter, and then cut into individual portions. So there are different ways to do it. Honestly, that's probably a faster, more efficient way to do it, but I am sticking with the old school method from start to finish with this recipe to show you guys exactly how I learned how to do it. So this is an alternative way other than the pat of butter, and I probably should say the more traditional way. So it's just brushing it on and then still folding it over. And we're going to see if it bakes differently. I have a feeling it's going to, because I haven't made these in quite a while, but what I do remember is that having that pat of butter in there in a concentrated little lump like that, it's going to sort of, once it melts away, it's probably going to leave like a little hole or a pocket of where that butter used to be. So I really think that this is probably the better way to do it. Again, it's driving me crazy to try to figure out why I was taught that way. I have no explanation. I really don't. All right, this is a really slow process of doing it this way too. And so these are things to consider, that if your conditions are really hot, like mine are today, my dough is proofing as I'm working with it. So if I don't speed it up here a little bit, my bread is literally going to bake before I even get it into the oven. So check this out. We've got 18 rolls. They're almost touching each other. This is going to have to sit in a warm spot again. They're going to get nice and fluffy and puffy, and they're almost going to start touching each other. So you get that classic pull apart rolls that we're going to have when these come out of the oven. So let's put those aside. I do have these other 6 that I want to show you how to do a traditional dinner roll style, but there's too much flour on my board. I have to clean this off. All right, so these are like tiny little micro baby dinner rolls. It's going to be a little bit difficult to round them like I traditionally would, because normally you would take the whole dinner roll in the palm of your hand and just sort of round it like this as you're pinching. Your fingers sort of like go underneath and create this perfect little round ball. So I'm not really sure how I'm going to do it with this tiny little baby, but it's pretty much the same idea. I sort of have my hands like a claw, and look, it's already taken shape. But the problem, if your board is too much flour, it's never going to stick to itself underneath and create this perfect little round ball. So I'm not sure if you can see this technique that I've got going on here, but look, perfect little baby dinner rolls. All right, next, all we have to do is let these proof again. They're gonna rise and double in size and get nice and fluffy and puffy. If your temperatures in your house are a little bit cool and a little bit dry, you're definitely gonna wanna cover these with maybe a plastic wrap so that you can kind of trap that humidity. If it's too dry, you're gonna get like a dry skin on your dough. And another way to avoid that is simply by brushing them with the butter before they proof rather than before they go in the oven. It's kind of the same thing. So you could brush them with butter to prevent that dry skin from forming over top while they proof. But if you are in Florida and it is super hot and humid like it is here today for me, you could just go ahead and really pop them outside, and these things are going to proof up in no time. So let's get that going right now. The chefs at school would say, "Paint your rolls like you are painting the walls in my house. Do not get a drop on my rug." So this is where the name butter crust comes into play, because not only is there butter folded into each one of these rolls, but they get brushed with butter also. Ooh, just take a look at these, you guys. These are perfect. The problem with fresh baked rolls is that I never can wait until they cool before I eat one. But check that out. Is that not the most perfect, cutest little Parker House roll that you've ever seen? Oh, I hope you can see this. Look at that. Perfect, soft rolls inside. Oh my God, you guys. Crusty crust from the butter and the salt. Taste the caraway. Perfect, buttery, little soft rye cheese butter crusts. I think this could have been where the butter pat was. Let's see. Yeah, definitely. This one had the butter pat, and this one had the brushed on butter. I don't know. CIA chef, whoever came up with that butter pat idea, I gotta tell you, I'm not loving it. But what I am loving, as always, is this recipe. So I really hope you guys are gonna try it. Please don't be intimidated by baking bread. This is a foolproof beginner's recipe that I just know you're going to love. So thanks a lot for watching my video. Go grab the recipes at Gretchen'sVeganBakery.com. And until next time, happy vegan baking, guys. Bye for now.